Good afternoon. How's everybody doing today? I'm Ram Lopez, and I'm the rector at St. George Episcopal Church and School. And I thought I would reflect a little bit as we got to the end of, we're getting close to the end of our Lenten journey. And I thought this is a good time to reflect on this past Lent. And as I was thinking about this Lent, one image kind of kept coming to mind, and that's the image of wilderness. When I think of wilderness, it's usually a very pleasant thought for me. I think of carved paths through the South Texas brush country at the ranch. I think of sitting by the campfire in a comfy camp chair and looking at the stars and sunset and sitting in front of that fire and watching that fire burn down. And when it burns itself out, I walk inside to a nice comfy ranch house and climb into a nice comfy bed. And if it's warm, I turn on the AC and everything's wonderful. My wilderness time sounds a whole lot like glamping, really. But wilderness, when you think of wilderness, when you look it up, the words that you see in the definition are wild, uncultivated, uninhabited by humans, desolate, bewildering. That's an interesting definition. Savage. This is more of what the earliest people of God would have thought about the wilderness. I picture the South Texas brush country, and they would have pictured the desert. It's hard to believe that it's only been about a month, a little over a month, that we started Lent. And on March the 1st, we heard the story of Jesus being driven into the wilderness, which would have been his desert, the desert around him, and his time of 40 days of fasting and prayer, and the temptations that came to him at the end of that by the devil. We gathered together and we heard these words. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. He fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down. For it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." And Jesus said to him again, "It is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. And he said to them, "All these I will give to you if you fall down and worship me." Jesus said to the devil, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve only him." Then the devil left him, and suddenly angels came and waited on him. If you want to go back and read that story yourself, it's in Matthew in the 4th chapter, verses 1 through 11. The story is, I think, for most of us Episcopalians and for others who are on a liturgical calendar, a pretty familiar story. And I don't know about other preachers, but I know sometimes I struggle to find something new to say about this familiar story. And it often falls back, for me, to preach on the temptations themselves and how those temptations inform our Lenten fast. But I don't think I'll ever read that story again. And I don't think I'll ever read that story with that same understanding. I'll never read it after the coronavirus and the COVID-19 pandemic in the same way. The temptations don't have my attention, the wilderness does. The wilderness has my attention, and maybe it has yours too. And the wilderness demands exploration in this time when we find ourselves in a wilderness, in the midst of a journey right through the wilderness. Lent 2020 is going to be historic. It's a story, the COVID-19 pandemic has just shattered the normalcy of our lives. Schools at all levels have closed. It's distance education for all now. Parents and educators alike are learning to use new technology. They're learning new skills. People are working from home. For others, businesses have closed. There's unemployment. There's the threat of financial instability. We have this physical distancing and this thing called Zoom. Medical professionals and first responders and hospitals are just under siege. Grocery stores are empty. Shelves are empty. There's fear. There's anxiety. And as I list out those things, I'm thinking, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's lots more that we can't see. The wilderness isn't a spiritual theme for us anymore. It's a reality. It's our reality. The earliest people of God in their wandering in the wilderness, after they were freed from slavery, they had many struggles. And the desolate, bewildering, and sometimes savage wilderness represented an unwanted journey. Freedom from slavery came to them, sent by God in the form of Moses. But that freedom had a cost. The cost was wandering in the wilderness. Yet it's in their time in the wilderness, while filled with struggle, that they were also filled with moments of divine presence and connection. The God who called them out of slavery into a journey to freedom, a journey to discover their identity, shows his constant fidelity in his presence with them along the journey. When the people complained to Moses about the food situation, they even went so far as to say, when we were slaves, we had food in our pots. They complained to Moses. And God literally provided manna from heaven on a daily basis, their daily bread. And God sends quail when they complained about not having meat. And when they didn't have water to drink, water came out of a stone. Jesus, steeped in all the stories of his faith tradition, remembered all those stories, remembered all those times when God was good and provided for the people. And so he can resist the devil's temptation to turn a piece of, a stone into bread. He trusted in God to provide for all his basic needs. When the people decided that they need some show of power, when they needed to see something that was big enough and strong enough to help them, what God did for them is he showed up in the form of a fire by day, fire and by night, and cloud by day, and it rested over the tabernacle. It was his way of showing the people that he was with them, and that he wouldn't leave them. And all that time when God was present, either in a cloud or fire over the tabernacle, they knew that they were where they needed to be. And when it was time to move, then the fire and the cloud would move and they would follow. Well, Jesus remembers how God revealed God's presence all the way through his ancestors' journey in the wilderness. And so when he sees that and he remembers that, he can resist the devil's temptation to try to show off. And then there was that great story. We all know this great story. Not so great, really, but it's a story that we know. And it's the people trying to fashion a new God. And so they gather up all the gold in the camp and they melt it down and they make a statue out of it. And we know what that is. It's the golden calf. And God reveals his power over those idols made by human hands and destroys that golden calf. And in doing so, reminds us that nothing should come between us and our relationship with God, that nothing should get in the way, should become a barrier between us and our God. And Jesus remembers God's power, and he remembers that he is connected to that power, that he is a son of God, that he is a child of God, and he's connected to that power. And he can drive the devil away. He can drive that liar away when the liar asks him to worship him in exchange for all the kingdoms of the earth. Matthew ends that story. He says, then the devil left him, and suddenly angels came and waited on him. As wild and bewildering and savage as the wilderness might be, the wilderness is also the place where God reveals God's presence, God's constant provision, and the power of God to overcome all that seeks to corrupt and destroy the creatures of God, to restore those who are afflicted and tormented. God sends ministering angels, messengers of hope, to comfort and restore Jesus, who resisted temptation by leaning into the promise made in those stories. And he experienced them by leaning into them. He experienced them as a present reality. Jesus experienced the wilderness as a thin place, a place where the reality of this life and God's eternal reality are just close. A thin place is one in which we can experience the nearness of the divine to our human experience. It's where heaven and earth exist spiritually side by side. It's that moment when we can feel the depth of our being, in the depth of our being, that God's sustaining presence is abiding in our lives in powerful ways, which reveals to us our truest self, our ultimate identity as children of God, made in God's image and likeness. So in 2015, I was able to do a sabbatical, thanks to the good people of St. George. And I wrote several poems during that time. And this is one that I wrote in 2015. And at that time, it spoke to the places where I had been on my spiritual journey, which I felt were thin places, which warmed my heart and left beautiful, loving marks of God's grace upon my heart. I read this poem today, and in the context of all that's going on in this COVID-19 wilderness, the poem has a different meaning for me now. It speaks about the holiness we can find in this wilderness. It speaks to the ways that we can unload all that burdens our spiritual journey and leave that stuff behind. It speaks to unbecoming the person we were and becoming the spirit-filled person of God, which the world will need post-COVID-19. So the poem is called Thin Places. It's hard to hold in the emotions in that moment. Deep within the soul stirs life, animated by the very presence of the one who created life. Amazing, too, is the moment of awareness, the moment where the very ground upon which one stands is recognized as holy, sacred, blessed to impart blessing upon the weary traveler. What is left at that point but to be in awe, to fall in love, to surrender, to release all that has become burden, to utter an incomprehensible word of thanks for another day, to unbecome and find our true self reflecting God. As difficult as these days are and will be, God is with us all. God is with you. God is with you. Don't forget that. In this unsettled wilderness time in our lives, with so much disruption, so much change, deep grief, deep grief, remember that God is with you. Remember that God walks with us all as we journey through our COVID-19 wilderness. Remember that God will give us all that we need in this moment. Remember that God's mercies are new each and every day. And God will give us this day our daily bread. Remember that the God who sustained Jesus in the wilderness of temptation and in the wilderness of the journey to the cross will not abandon you, but will sustain you. Remember that the God who raised from the dead Jesus of Nazareth will raise us to a new life reflective of God's love. May we who journey together in this wilderness discover that our lives this day are very thin places, places where God draws nearer and nearer, day by day, forming us into our truest self, the self that reflects the love of God. And it's the love of God, friends, that can heal the world. So as we draw this Lenten journey to a close, join me in being thankful for this journey. Join me in being thankful for this opportunity to discover God at work in you and in me and in the world around us. And walk with me the journey to the cross, starting with Holy Week, with Palm Sunday, and going through the week. Let's walk to the cross of Jesus, because it's at the cross of Jesus that we cross over into a new reality that every one of us will experience, the new reality of the resurrection life. And I truly believe in the depth of my heart that when we pass through the tomb of COVID-19, that we will live and move and have our being in a brand new reality. We'll get a taste of the resurrection that we'll all enjoy. And we'll find ourselves renewed, made whole, and ever more full of grace and love. God is with us. God will not abandon us. The wilderness is just a place where God can reveal God's self, where you and I can find the truth that God loves us and will never ever abandon us. And life, new life, joyful life, graceful life, loving life is just around the corner. God bless you today. Bye-bye.